Good evening, I'm Claudia Czerwińska and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. It is now official. The Vatican has announced that Pope Francis's funeral will take place on Saturday morning. TVP World's correspondent Alex Cadier is in the Holy See and will be bringing us more in the days leading up to the solemn ceremony over the weekend. More on that in just a moment, but before we continue, the latest headlines. Who will be the next pope? We'll take a closer look at some of the key candidates to succeed the late pontiff. Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski is set to outline Poland's foreign policy priorities for 2025. The U.S. will hold talks with Ukrainian and European officials in London to discuss a potential peace plan. On Tuesday, the Vatican confirmed that Pope Francis's funeral will take place on Saturday morning, with several world leaders in attendance. So far, this includes the attendance of U.S. President Donald Trump, French President Emmanuel Macron, other EU leaders, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. And as the Vatican is getting ready for the ceremony to take place over the weekend, we're now connecting live with our correspondent Alex Cadier, who has more on the preparations. Good evening, Alex. So what do we know about the upcoming funeral service preparations, and are we to see more heads of state attend the ceremony?
Good evening. Well, as you can see behind me, people have already started flocking to Rome for this funeral to mark the passing of Pope Francis, and that it will take place in the Basilica behind me, a relatively low-key affair compared to what we've seen for late popes in the past. That was the wish of Pope Francis, to have a slightly lower-key funeral. Effectively, that will be taking place just on Saturday morning, as you said, behind me. Donald Trump, Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, as well as the President of the European Council, Antonio Costa. We also know Vladimir Zelenskyy will be here, and Prince William will be here instead of his father, King Charles III. Of course, being the head of the Church of England, protocol dictates he cannot attend the Pope's funeral. But certainly we can see just from being in the city these past few hours that hundreds upon thousands of people are flocking to this city. It will be certainly a very moving, very emotional few days in the lead up to this funeral here in Rome. Certainly we will bring you all those details as the week unfolds towards that very historic funeral here in Rome.
Thank you so much. That was Alex Cadier reporting live from Rome. And as the Vatican is getting ready for the Pope's funeral set to take place this weekend, the questions about who will become the next Bishop of Rome is starting to make rounds in church circles, the media, and among the faithful. In the days following the funeral, the Conclave will be called to elect a new Pope, a tradition that remained unchanged for centuries. A diverse group of electors will include strong representation from Italy, Asia, and Africa. Sasha Farbach reports.
As the sun rises over the Vatican, the Catholic Church faces a pivotal moment. The question of who will succeed in leading in its 1.4 billion followers is already unfolding. In Poland, where the Church holds significant influence, expectations are running high.
The Church needs a Pope who, after these great pontificates, because fortunately the 20th and 21st centuries it had great pontificates of popes, needs a Pope of creative continuity.
Pope Francis, while considered progressive by some, was criticized for his slow response to Ukraine's suffering, causing controversy. And Ukrainians are now waiting for a new pontiff to take a stronger, more decisive stance.
We would like to have someone who would behave like St. John Paul II. That is our dream.
Of 240 cardinals worldwide, only 135 are eligible to vote, as they must be under 80 years of age. Europe still leads with 53 cardinals, but under Pope Francis, there's been a significant shift with more appointments from Asia, Africa, and Latin America. In fact, 108 of the 135 electors gathering in the Sistine Chapel were appointed during his papacy, reflecting a broader global perspective that may also mirror the late Pope's wider policies.
The first challenge, and it will certainly be a challenge, is to maintain this direction, so to speak, of the universality of the Church on all continents. And in this sense, of course, there are certainly some opportunities there for cardinals from Africa and Asia.
While it remains unclear who would lead, there are several key names, each with a unique vision for the Church's future, who could lead the papacy. From Hungary, Peter Erdo represents a traditionalist, Europe-focused approach appealing to conservatives within the Church. Robert Serra of Guinea is known for his strong opposition to liberal theology and secularism, making him a favorite among those seeking a return to traditional teachings. Peter Turkson of Ghana, an energetic African leader, is seen as a conservative but also opposed to criminalizing LGBTQ relationships. In Italy, Pietro Parolin, the Vatican Secretary of State, is a top contender with his diplomatic experience and ties to Pope Francis. Luis Antonio Tagle of the Philippines, known as the Asian Francis, is a moderate with a strong focus on social issues, while Matteo Suppi, also from Italy, brings a progressive, peace-driven approach to leadership. Whoever is chosen will face an array of challenges. The conclave is yet to be convened, and while many electors were chosen by Pope Francis, it's far from certain they'll back his progressive policies. The longest conclave of the 20th century lasted 5 days. Francis, however, was elected just a day after the 2013 conclave began. As always, anything can unfold before the white smoke rises over St. Peter's. Sasha Farbach, TVP World.
Francis, who served as the Pope for over a decade, was a transformative figure in the Catholic Church, known as much for his progressive reforms as for the controversies they stirred within the Church's ranks, especially in Poland. Similarly, the Pope's stance on the war in Ukraine has sparked a controversy followed by a fierce debate on whether the pontiff should have drawn a clear line in the sand on who is the victim and who's the perpetrator. Marek Steele took a closer look at controversies past with his next report.
The threshold for popes was set high with the pontificate of John Paul II, especially for Poles. The Pope who led his faithful countrymen through the dark times of communism was not easy to succeed. Not by Pope Benedict nor by Francis, says the spokesperson of the Archdiocese of Warsaw.
I had the impression that Pope Francis was really uncertain about who he would meet in Poland. And the Pope's associates explained to me later that it was related to the fact that he was visiting the homeland of his great predecessor, John Paul II.
Most Catholics will remember Francis as the Pope of the excluded.
The matter of mercy of poor and impoverished people, what we ourselves go through, was very important to him. He wanted and achieved many changes and reforms. Now we have to reflect on whether it was a good mission or not.
His stance, especially on social issues, was not always understood by Poles and Catholic hierarchs in the country.
I think about him as a person who was really open open to people who are outside the church, who have different thinking, different opinion about important problems in society.
He was the first to reach out to the LGBT community. As he approved blessings for same-sex couples, the decision did trigger consternation among a very conservative Catholic Church in Poland.
When the Pope said that we should bless a person who are homosexuals, he said because we should bless each person, everybody, but not the marriages.
Pope Francis also addressed some of the darker sides of the Catholic Church. One of them was the issue of pedophilia. In 2019, he promised an end to the conspiracy of silence and signed a document which established new norms to combat sexual abuse. Still, he did not fully resolve the problem. In an interview for Gazeta Wyborcza Daily, theologist Monika Białkowska stated that in Poland, Pope Francis left a very divided church.
Some love him, others are his staunch opponents. When you think about it, in our country, this line of demarcation coincides with the line of political differences.
Although he did walk to the Russian embassy a day after the bombing started in Ukraine to protest the war, Pope Francis never condemned Russia as the aggressor. The position, which some defend as in line with Catholic teaching, had not been well received in Ukraine or in Poland.
He was an outstanding person, but he didn't help Ukraine enough. And I want the next Pope to stand up for Ukraine. His last speech before his death, it was about Ukraine, about the need to stop this bloodshed. I hope the whole world will hear his final wish.
Pope Francis remains an important figure for many Poles despite the differences. Polish President Andrzej Duda has declared Saturday, the day of Pope Francis's funeral, a day of national mourning. Marek Steele, TVP World.
On Tuesday evening, Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski is set to present the priorities of Poland's foreign policies for 2025 in a closed session of the Parliament's Foreign Committee. On Wednesday, the document in question will be presented to the parliamentary publicly. Kazimierz Łysiak is currently in the Polish Parliament and joins us now. Good evening, Kazimierz. So what do we know about the new foreign policy for 2025? It has not yet been published, this is our understanding, but are there any predictions as to any possible changes?
Good evening, Claudia. As you've just mentioned, this was a closed session of the Foreign Affairs Committee with Foreign Minister Sikorski present. So we don't know much details about the priorities of Poland when it comes to its foreign policies for 2025. I've asked earlier the spokesperson of the Foreign Ministry whether he could share some more details, but he said it's all hush-hush for now, at least until tomorrow when the Polish Foreign Minister will be presenting these priorities here in the Polish Parliament for the public and for the members of the Parliament. So what we can do now is take a look at the priorities that Poland had in 2024 in the past year. So hopefully you will see a nice graphic right now on the screen. And we can see that the biggest priority for Poland in the past year has been security. Security, of course, in the context of the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine. And this security is especially important not only for the Polish government, but also for the Polish people, as the war is happening just beyond Poland's borders. And this support for Ukraine and security are some of the things which are very unlikely to change in 2025 when it comes to Poland's foreign policies. Secondly, Foreign Minister Sikorski said that he wanted for Poland to have a stronger role and position in the European Union. That's especially in comparison to the previous conservative government of the Law and Justice Party, which was often at odds with the EU. At odds especially over its judicial reforms, which the EU found to be undemocratic. And now the current coalition, led by Prime Minister Donald Tusk, has been trying to mend these relations. We are also in the middle of the Polish presidency in the Council of the European Union, and also Poland is one of the leading countries in the EU when it comes to advocating for taking more responsibility for the security of the continent and for defense spending. Poland is currently spending close to 5% of its GDP on defense, so security definitely was and most likely will be one of the biggest priorities for Poland. The last 2 points last year were about generally a bigger presence on the international stage when it came to politics, and also to have a more professional and apolitical foreign service. So what about now? What about the year 2025? Well, the situation in global politics has changed drastically, mostly because we have a new US President, Donald Trump, who has been rather blunt in his approach towards Ukraine, Vladimir Zelenskyy, the president, the war, and also towards Europe. President Trump has also imposed tariffs across the board, including on the European Union. So now Poland is facing this new reality where the US is still the biggest guarantee of safety, but also it has to navigate this new world where Donald Trump is definitely in a much more blunt approach towards the continent. I spoke earlier with an analyst of international relations from the Daszyński Center to ask him about what he thinks the priorities for 2025 could be. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Minister Radosław Sikorski is going to address more about responsibility of Europe, responsibility of Poland regarding Ukraine. I assume that United States would like to withdraw a little bit from Europe, also from Ukraine, and I think this is the moment when Polish Minister of Foreign Affairs would like to address this necessity of giving more equipment, more like financial support to Ukrainians who are bravely fighting for not only there, but also for on European defense and security.
So whether we will see a mention of transatlantic ties in tomorrow's speech, that remains to be seen. But like I said, tomorrow, Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski in the morning will be presenting Poland's priorities for its foreign policies for the year 2025. There will also be a speech from Poland's President, Andrzej Duda, so be on the lookout for our reports from that. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you so much. That was Kazimierz Łysiak reporting live from the Polish Parliament in Warsaw. Vladimir Putin has offered to halt his invasion of Ukraine across the current front line. This offer will surely be approached with caution, as Russia has found it hard so far to stick to its promises. Earlier, Donald Trump has said peace was supposed to take less than 24 hours, but after 3 months since he took office, peace in Ukraine is still elusive. Now we have another U.S. offer on the table to get a ceasefire, but how will this be received in Ukraine? Don Arleth is there and has this next report.
This week could be a pivotal week into ending the war in Ukraine. The latest U.S. proposal sees actual concrete measures to try and get them over the hill and get them to a ceasefire. Of course, we all know that this is a two-ended conflict and something that has been very elusive for the Trump administration to stop, despite their previous promises. Now, this latest proposal suggests that Ukraine does not join NATO, that the U.S. somehow takes over the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which has been a major security concern for not only Europeans, but especially Ukrainians, in that Russians have been stationed there since the beginning of the war and using it as an outpost. And now another issue, and probably the most pressing one, is the situation in Crimea. The United States is proposing that Ukraine say goodbye to Crimea and actually allow it to be recognized as Russian territory. And of course, this is something that since 2016 and the Russian illegal annexation of the peninsula has not been on the table and not even been under consideration, especially in the United States on a bipartisan basis between Republicans and Democrats. Well, we're here in Lviv today. We spoke to a political science professor from the Catholic University here in Lviv, and he pretty much confirmed what we had already assumed.
Ukrainians will never accept this proposal. Why? First, because we do not trade our territories and our people. Second, it has a geopolitical international impact. Well, we will, by this token, reintroduce in the geopolitics the rule of force. Not the rule of law, but rule of force. Then there will be question about Taiwan, there will be question about different border conflicts, etc., etc. That's bad.
And of course, tomorrow in London, the United Kingdom, France, the United States, and Ukraine will all be meeting there to discuss the details of this latest proposal, and of course to hammer out all the details, and we will see hopefully, potentially, more negotiations in the days ahead. Reporting from Lviv, Ukraine, Don Arleth, TVP World.
NATO might get a new base for its troops, as Denmark has offered to host a battalion for the alliance on its territory. The unit in question would be in charge of communications, significantly contributing to an increase in the combat capabilities of the alliance. Zuzanna Jurek has more on the story.
Denmark has offered to host a new NATO Signal Command battalion within its territories. The unit would be tasked with coordinating communication between military forces, including oral, written and data exchange.
The main focus of this command is to ensure that NATO deployments and deployments that may need to be deployed, contingency deployments, are well supplied with the communications infrastructure that they need to push forward.
Denmark, which has set a goal of 3% GDP spending on defense, has established supporting mechanisms to increase military deployment. This includes the Acceleration Fund, established in February, which will be used for the Signal Command Battalion. The fund frees up approximately 7 billion euros.
Over the next 2 years, with one message to the Chief of Defense: buy, buy, buy. Buy what you can immediately contribute to a stronger defense and thus a stronger deterrence.
The Danish offer would not only expand the range of operating command centers, of which there are currently 3 across NATO.
Denmark is trying to be a bridge between the North Atlantic operating theatre, the Arctic operating theatre further north, and the Baltic Sea region theatre to the east. It is a shoring up of NATO communications infrastructure in the north.
According to Denmark's defense minister Troels Lund Poulsen, the implementation of this decision will contribute to an increase in the combat power of the alliance.
Among the Nordic countries, Denmark has particular experience with this type of work. Therefore, Denmark is offering NATO a signal battalion headquarters with responsibility in, among other things, the Nordic region to be established in Denmark.
It is also an important step in boosting regional defense capabilities, which have been tested in recent years with an uptake of attacks on energy infrastructure, pipelines, water supplies, as well as damage to undersea cables, all of which have been a key security concern for the Baltic Sea region.
According to the International Cable Protection Committee, there are an average of 150 to 200 outages per year worldwide and about 3 incidences per week. But in the Baltic Sea region, it's a little bit different considering the security environment, and it is fairly obvious that there's a Russian footprint in this.
The Danish Ministry of Defense anticipates the command center will be fully operational by 2029. For TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
Pope Francis, who served as pontiff for over a decade, was a transformative figure in the Catholic Church. And yet, he was seen by some as a controversial figure. What legacy did he leave behind? Has he left the Church better than he found it? And finally, who will be the next Bishop of Rome? Joining me now to talk about the pontiff and what's next for the Catholic Church, I'm joined by Father Paweł Rytel-Andrianik, head of the Polish section of the Vatican Radio. Good evening, Father. Thank you so much for joining me on the program.
Good evening. Pleasure.
Pleasure's all mine. So while doing my research, I came across a piece of information that both you and the pontiff lived in the same building. So you might have been in contact. And one thing that was always mentioned in terms of Pope Francis was how he was always open to everyone. So anyone and everyone could approach him to talk to him. What are some of the most fondest memories you have from those encounters? Have you had any?
Yes, it was really amazing. It was like a dream to live with the Holy Father in the same building. And then I remember at the very beginning, he invited me to his table and say, "Oh, the Pope cannot be alone, so please come and join me." And it was very moving. And then we met in the garage. He said, "Where are you going?" To the Vatican Radio, to my work. "Oh, have fun." And recently we met in the elevator. And he said, always, and he repeated this, "Coraggio," which means courage, avanti, forward, and don't leave your good sense of humor. And he was among other people, he wanted to be with the people. It was very moving to see the Pope in St. Peter's Square, to the elderly, to the disabled people, to kiss the foot of the prisoners in the prison, because this is Pope Francis. And he always said, "Todos, todos, todos," which means everybody, everybody, everybody has a place in the Catholic Church.
So when you look at the situation and the pontiff passing away on the second day, on the second Easter Christmas day, would you say that he left a gaping hole, or perhaps he left a legacy that is going to thrive and is going to be continued by the next Pope?
Let me answer with something very personal, but I think it is not only my impression. When I saw for the first time the face of the Pope after his death, because now he is at the Santa Marta, and you have many people who work in the Vatican, they have the chance to see him and to honor him, as well as other people will have it tomorrow. So my first impression, when I saw the face of the Pope, he was very, almost smiling, to say, in other words, the mission completed. I did my best. And his last day was at St. Peter's Square and also at the Basilica, at the Loggia, and he gave the blessing Urbi et Orbi. And he was with the people. And then, tomorrow, actually when he died, and it was revealed only today, he said to his personal assistant, medical assistant, "Thank you for bringing me to St. Peter's Square." It is so profound. One of the, I think, these were his last words. "Thank you for taking me to St. Peter's Square," which means thank you for taking me to the people, because he always wanted to be with the people.
It must have definitely been an important moment for him as well, as he struggled with his health, which we reported here on TVP World and so many media outlets reported before. As you mentioned, he was definitely a man with a mission. So looking at his papacy, what would you say were the staples of his legacy? What were some of the most important changes that he brought during his pontificate?
I mean, there are three main points which are actually in his last message as the Pope. Because his last message was given at the Blessing Urbi et Orbi on the Easter day. And he said three things. First, life has value. Life of the child in the womb of a mother, and life of the elderly. Second, take care of the poor. You know, he used to invite poor people, homeless, before he started his pilgrimages. Recently, he invited the homeless people for cappuccino to Santa Marta, to his home. And then migrants. He said, we have to help those who escape from war and hunger. And then prisoners. He visited prisons. And the third thing is the peace. Because he, you know, how many times he urged people, and he spoke about Ukraine, Israel, Palestine. Sometimes people didn't understand him. But he's like a prophet. We do not have any other head of state who spoke so many times about Ukraine, about Israel, and about Palestine, about the Holy Land. So this is his legacy, which was included in his last message.
It's interesting that you mentioned this because that was one of the subjects of our reports tonight about the controversies that surrounded the Pope. We've heard about his outreach to the LGBTQ+ community. We've heard about his activism when it comes to protecting the environment and the climate crisis, which some in the church drew criticism from, believing that he's venturing too far into the secular subjects. We also heard him speak to one of the dailies in Italy as the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began, saying that the line is not so clear because Russia had a NATO knocking at its door. So there was definitely a lot of controversy. How do you assess those decisions that the Pope made during his pontificate?
First, and the most important, the Catholic Church is 1,400,000,000 people. So it is normal that there are various opinions about the popes. Second, personally, I think that he's a prophet, which does not mean that he is perfect in everything. And sometimes his spokesman clarified things, as you mentioned, about the Ukraine, this one, and others. But sometimes I see that the people tend to forget the whole approach to Ukraine. You know, 200 trucks he sent from the Vatican to Ukraine. He spoke so many times about Ukraine. And the people from Ukraine, like Shevchuk, Archbishop Shevchuk, who is the head of the Greek Catholic Church, he thanked Pope Francis for what he did for Ukraine. And he's coming. Zelenskyy is coming. So this is the signal. You know, there is no other nation like Ukraine, and no other nation ever in the papacy mentioned so many times like Ukraine. Yes, that's right. Maybe once or twice, or sometimes it was not fortunate, or maybe he could do better. Like everybody, each one of us. But as the whole, he helped so much Ukrainian people, and he really did the best what he could as the Pope. And the Ukrainian people themselves acknowledge this. And the presence of Zelenskyy for his funeral is the best sign.
And finally, today we found out that the Vatican released information about Pope Francis's funeral, which is supposed to take place on Saturday morning. How is that funeral going to look like? What happens now, and what's going to be the order during the day?
Actually, now, today and tomorrow, the Pope is still at the Santa Marta, and then tomorrow will be the body will be taken, and the procession will be put in the St. Peter's Basilica, and the people can go and revere the body of the Pontiff. And then on Saturday will be unusual funeral. Why? First, this is the first Pope for more than 100 years that is buried not in St. Peter's Basilica, but at Santa Maria Maggiore, St. Mary the Major. He wanted to be buried there in front of the icon of the Virgin Mary. So there will be the procession, or will be, his body will go throughout the city of Rome. So this is unusual. And it makes this funeral also special. But it shows that he wanted to be buried in the St. Mary the Major Basilica for his love of Mary. When he started his apostolic pilgrimages, he always started with this basilica in front of the icon of the Blessed Virgin Mary. It shows his love to Mary, and he will be buried there. And it is his decision, so this will be unusual funeral. And so many people from all over the world are coming to respect and show respect to Pope Francis. And this is a great sign. What he wanted to build was fraternity among the people, among the nations, and he did his best, and as we see on his face. This is really very profound, and not only my personal impression. On his face, you can see the mission is completed.
And that's a very beautiful way to close this interview. Father, thank you so much. Father Paweł Rytter-Andrianik, Polish Section Chief of the Vatican Radio. Pleasure to have you on the program.
Thank you very much.
And so this would be all for now here on World News Tonight, but please do stay tuned. We're back in just a moment with more news and features.